ध्यायेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमोत्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्यङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणेश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाभ्यसितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षातात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामच्युतव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम् नमो रमण. We will commence the Friday Atmavichara session by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesham. I will be reading from the book Ramana Answers. Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950. A compilation of all the answers given by Bhagavan on the subject of Atmavichara by our founder, President Sri A.R. Natarajanji. After contemplating on this week's question and answer of session, contemplated in Ramana Gita, and then finally prayers. Namo Ravana. Sorry, the internet again. Some issue here. I've switched over to my mobile. Hopefully, it will be all right. Am I audible? Okay. Sorry about that. The 25th question that we are looking for this week: is it morally right for a man to renounce his household duties when he once realizes that his highest duty is continuous thought of when we get deep into the self abidance that comes to all of us? Now that we have understood that the highest duty is continuous thought of the self, and is it not morally right then to renounce everything, all our duties, household, whatsoever, and spend our complete time on the contemplation of the self? Self attention is simple renunciation. Bhagavan says, this desire to renounce things is the obstacle. Self attention is simple renunciation. Here, what is Bhagavan trying to bring to us? Two things. When there is a desire to renounce, then there is this individual who exists separate, who wants to contemplate on the self. So the very idea that we are thinking that I, as Dileep, as an individual, is true, and then now that I understand self attention is my highest goal, therefore, highest duty, therefore, I attention to the self, continuous contemplation of the self. The very idea that I have taken I to be real and that I have and self is something apart, and therefore this desire exists for me to continuously contemplate on the self, makes it very, very clear that we have not understood the truth as it is. Bhagavan is talking about the Sahaja Samadhi, the Sahaja, a natural thing that is there. Actually, what is only the self. But moment I think that I am an individual separate and I am not that self, and that self is something that I should contemplate with my eyes closed and do a meditation and things like that, and that only can happen only when I renounce all these household duties, then I have actually given reality to all these things as opposed to that self alone is. The reality has been given to all these divisions that I as an individual exist and I as a person can do some effort, and then self is something apart from me. So all these divisions have been given reality. So Bhagavan very beautifully brings it to our attention. The very desire to renounce is the obstacle. That means that is making us not experience here and now that self alone is, because I am holding on to this idea that I as an individual exist and I as an individual have now understood what self is, and I have understood that this is my highest duty, and therefore I have to forego all my other household duties and continuously contemplate on the self. All these divisions have been given reality, and the truth that self alone is is not even duly being considered. So, and therefore, Bhagavan says that very idea that we are holding on to this division to do sadhana is the obstacle to not recognize that the self alone is. This is very, very important. This Bhagavan somewhere else says comes only because of the weakness of the mind. What is only the self, and we are not able to stay with it. The weakness of the mind, in the sense that the mind is real, and we are not able to understand what the scriptures and Bhagavan is all trying to say, that everything is nothing but the self. Instead of holding on to that, we are given a lot of weightage and reality to all these thoughts, including the I thought, the thought that I have to do some sadhana, the thought that the self is apart and I have to contemplate on it. We have given all the real weightage and reality to these thoughts or the thought based understanding rather than recognize that what is only nothing but the self. If these divisions are not there, then or what remains? What remains is only the pure self, the truth. This we have not understood. Therefore, Bhagavan says that these desires becomes the obstacle to recognize the truth that self alone is here and now. We postpone it to a particular date or a particular effort that we need to put in the due course of time. On the contrary, if we inquire to whom is this desire, who is that one who wants to renounce? And then and there, we transcend these divisions and we can get back to the reality which alone is the self. We have transcended these divisions, and therefore this enquiry is a very powerful means that Bhagavan has given for us to get back to that truth which is the self by inquiring every thought. And therefore I keep saying that every thought, whether it is good, bad, ugly or spiritual, we should inquire. To whom is this? Because it is all built on the foundation of the first and primary division that I as an individual is separate from the self. I am limited to this name and form, and therefore self is something else apart. And to that thinker, to that individual, these thoughts further arise that I should do this, I should do that, I should renounce this. All of it are built on that false foundation. If we can only inquire and remove the first and the foremost division by the inquiry, who am I? We'll realize here and now that self alone is, and we also realize that the self-inquiry, the inquiry that we are being blessed by Bhagavan, is such a brahmastram that it brings us back to that truth which alone is. And therefore, now that we have been blessed with this brahmastram, now doesn't matter how many thoughts come, whatever may be the nature of the thought, we need not worry that there are so many thoughts also. If it is making us give our attention to it and appearing, creating that division, the grace of Bhagavan which has come as Brahmastram, who am I, can bring us back to the truth that self alone is here and now, and free us here and now from all these false desires, false renouncement, false ideas and concepts, which are all only obstacle and not recognizing that the self alone is. So, therefore, Bhagavan says self attention is only a simple renunciation. So, self attention is not something huge effort. If you renounce all these divisions, and the foremost of it, the I, the individual thought, then self is self established. It's already established. It is already the only truth which is there. The superimpositions are making us feel that it is far away. So Bhagavan is saying, if we simply renounce those thoughts, that is all that is need to be done. We need not have to renounce anything physically, anything, because everything is nothing but the self. This very idea of division that is created by giving reality to the thought is the only thing that we simply have to renounce. And for that, the enquiry is the Brahmastram, which brings the attention from the division back to the unity that which alone is the self. The immense grace of Bhagavan, with which alone we have come to this most direct path, which establishes here and now, which helps us transcend all the divisions and see and get abiding in the truth. The Atma Vichara that Bhagavan has given is the most direct path that we should use no matter how many thoughts rises within us. And we should continue to inquire as long as there are thoughts taking our attention away from or making us feel that there are divisions. We should continue to inquire until all the divisions fall away, and then we realize that self, which is thought free alone, is here and there, here and now. The immense grace of Bhagavan, let us do Atma Vichara for the next 20 minutes. Shri Ramanaya Namo Anna or Krishna Dharka.
Namo Ramana, prostrations to Ramana, shining as a self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self, manifest as Ramana, we have been meditating on Bhagavan's answers to devotees on the subject of self-enquiry and also practice the very words which Bhagavan is speaking, the practice of self-enquiry by the immense grace of Bhagavan. And in this part of the satsang today, we are meditating on the verses of Ramana Gita, which are the answers of Bhagavan again to the questions, specific questions of different devotees from the years 1913 to the year 1917. And these have been recorded by Ganapati Muni in 18 chapters as the Ramana Gita. So we are meditating on the verses in Ramana Gita, and we are now meditating on the 5th chapter, which is called the Science of the Heart or Hridaya Vidya. The first chapter was Upasana Pradhanya Nirupanam, the importance of practice, which is why we are having this scripture called the Ramana Gita. Because there arises a need for practice, there arises a need for clarification about the practice. If there is no need for practice, there will be no need for any clarification, there will be no need for any scripture whatsoever. Because there is need for practice. And why is there need for practice? Despite the fact that the self is ever attained, the self is of the nature of pure knowledge, yet we are needing to practice to experience our own nature, our own self. This is because of the clouding of the truth by what we call as ignorance. So there is a need to remove the veil of ignorance in order to be able to perceive the sun of knowledge. Now, because of that, the first chapter has been entitled Upasana Pradhanya Nirupanam, the importance or the paramount importance, pradhanya of practice. Without practice, one cannot experience one's true nature, even though it is one's own. One needs to practice because one has been conditioned otherwise. One has forgotten and been conditioned into thinking oneself to be something which is not one's true nature. Therefore, we need to practice getting back to the self. Then, in the second chapter, which is called Margatraya Kathanam, that is the 3 paths. What are the 3 paths of Upasana have been delineated by Bhagavan through his Ekashloki. Hridaya Kuhara Madhye Kevalam Brahma Matram Aham Aham Iti Sakshat Atma Rupena Bhati. Before telling what is the path or what are the paths to get back to the self, Bhagavan tells us in his Ekashloki what exactly is the self, what is the nature of the self. And then he goes on to delineate 3 paths which could also be called one, says Ganapati Muni. So the path to self-knowledge, the self, the nature of the self and the path to self-knowledge are already defined in the 2nd chapter. In the 3rd chapter, Bhagavan, in answer to a question, defines what is the paramount duty. When the nature of the self has been shown to us and the path to it has also been revealed, what greater duty than to get back and abide in the self? If we do not know what the truth about ourselves is. If we had no clue, if we were in total darkness, there would be no duty cast upon us to get back to our own true nature, because how can we get back when we do not know about it? But this nature of the self having been clearly defined and brought into the realm of our knowledge, further the path to getting back to it also having been clearly defined, what is the next step to be taken? Or rather, the only step to be taken. The paramount duty is to abide in the self, says Bhagavan. Provided one wants the highest, one wants the self, then this is the paramount duty. So we need not worry about any of the other tasks that have been assigned to us, need not worry about dereliction of duty in any other area, but be amply clear that abiding in the self alone is our true duty or the highest duty. So the paramount duty has been described in or affirmed, clarified in the 3rd chapter. And then in the 4th chapter, Bhagavan was questioned about the nature of knowledge. The nature of the self has been given to us in the 2nd chapter in the Ekashloki. But here the Muni questions Bhagavan about the nature of knowledge, or rather, in a way, the way to get back to this knowledge. Because the need for chapter 4. In chapter 4, the Muni is clarifying whether a concept regarding the self would be good enough. Any concept. The corrective concept, saying I am Brahman. Since I have a wrong concept now, saying I am the body, if I get a corrective concept, would it suffice? Or if that will not suffice, why will it not suffice, says Bhagavan? Because it would be a mere thought. It would be one more thought. It would be a function of the mind. If that is the case, if no function of the mind can get me the true knowledge of the self, how am I to comprehend the self? Or how am I to experience the self? How am I to establish myself in true knowledge? For that, Bhagavan has said that when the mind turns towards its own true nature or seeks its own true nature, it is mysteriously able to comprehend it. Or inexplicably, though there are no two, though the mind cannot know the self, yet it begins to comprehend, and it is established in the self by the act of turning back to its true nature. What is the act of turning to its true nature? In the 5th chapter, Bhagavan gives the indication it is turning back to the source, because Bhagavan has already told us in the 2nd chapter in that Ekashloki, Hridi Visha, enter the heart. The paths are only to enter the heart. So Bhagavan now gives us clarification or clarity about what is the nature of the heart. Hridaya Vidya is the title of the 5th chapter. And this again is not an answer to any question by Bhagavan, but of his own accord, Bhagavan is explaining the nature of the heart. He begins by saying that it is the source of all thoughts. It is the source of the I thought, and to describe it would be a mere concept. Bhavanakriti varnanam. However, out of compassion for us, in order to provide us a support or a clue, an invaluable clue in the form of the location of the spiritual heart and the nature of the spiritual heart, Bhagavan does go on to explain what is the nature of the spiritual heart. He points out that it is not the Anahata Chakra, it is not the physical heart or the blood pumping organ, it is to the right, and it is the source. What is meant by the source? It says, from this is the source of the energy of the self. It finds a location in the body from which it functions. If we give reality to manifestation, then this is the way that reality appears. How does it appear? That the energy of the self through the Sushumna moves to the Sahasrara or the head, which is the mind center. And from that Sahasrara, from the mind or the source of the mind, which is the I thought, it spreads to the entire body. And because it spreads to the entire body, Bhagavan says, samsari manujo bhavet. Man becomes worldly, man becomes involved with the world because of the awareness of a body and because of identifying with that body and having sense experiences. However, Bhagavan through this process indicates to us how to get back to the self as well. And therefore he says that when one gets back to the self, when the Sahasrara energy, the energy of the mind, gets absorbed into the self, then the sense perceptions do not matter. They do not bind us. One does not become a samsari because one is absorbed in the heart, in the self. So this is what needs to be done. When Bhagavan says, if you turn the attention and rest it in the source, the heart, turn the attention from the mind into the heart, then the sense perceptions will not matter. He is indicating to us that that is what needs to be done. Because Bhagavan would be subtle always in his communications. There is a beautiful anecdote which Ganeshan shared, that how Bhagavan would never compel anyone to do anything, but would be only suggestive. And there was a devotee called Yalpani from Kerala, and he was really a fickler for cleanliness, and he would mop the entire outer spaces of Skandashrama with cow dung to make it clean and to make it antiseptic. However, for many people, the cow dung felt like that itself was unclean, though actually cow dung is very antiseptic, it cleans, and it was to cleanse the place and keep it clean that Yalpani would mop it all with cow dung. But some devotees who did not like it admonished him for doing so. Being sensitive, devotees are often sensitive because their sensibilities have become so subtle that they are sensitive to the slightest word or the slightest glance or the slightest deed. So Yalpani felt upset that he was thus scolded, and he climbed up a coconut tree. They climbed up a coconut tree because he was an expert. He was from Ceylon actually. Yalpanam is Ceylon. And he was an expert, and he went up there and he said, I am not climbing down from this tree. Come what may, I will die here. I don't need food. If I get very hungry, I'll pluck a coconut, and I know how to drink from the coconut. Let me see how long I survive here. I will survive. I'm not coming down. Though the other devotee apologized and tried to ask him to come down, he just refused to come down from the tree. Then it was lunchtime. When it was lunchtime, Bhagavan, at that time in Skandashram, only few inmates were there. So Bhagavan would cast his glance around and see whether all the inmates had gathered before starting the meal. And he noticed, of course, that Yalpani was not there. So he turned and asked the other devotees, where is Yalpani? What happened to him? Then the truth came out that Yalpani was feeling hurt and he was sitting on top of the coconut tree. And then Bhagavan went there, and it seems he told him very sweetly, very gently, Yalpani, sapda varlame, you may come for lunch. You may come for lunch. He didn't tell him, come down, come for lunch. So Ganeshanana would say, the moment Yalpani heard Bhagavan saying, Yalpani, sapda varlame, he, like a little kitten, he quickly climbed down the tree and came and sat in his space near Bhagwan, wherever that allotted space was for lunch. But the point which Ganeshananna said, the beauty of this episode is that Bhagavan did not order anyone. There are many such instances, and devotees have said that Bhagavan would not order anybody. His suggestions were gentle, and there were suggestions, and one had to be sensitive to the suggestion and follow it. And so we can take it that when Bhagavan is telling us what happens when the Sahasrara is merged in the heart, we can take it as his suggestion to merge the Sahasrara in the heart, to merge the mind in the heart, to turn it away from sense objects, to turn it away from extroversion. How? By asking every time a sense awareness arises, by asking for whom is it? How does a sense awareness arise? How does an object awareness arise? It arises in us only in the form of thought. So the moment a thought arises, Bhagavan says also in Ashtakam, ask yourself, for whom? From where is this arising? And turn the mind back into the source. And Bhagavan has said this has to be done until a point when, even if one is having interactions in the world, sannikarshena yadyapi, vishaya sannikarshena yadyapi, even if objects are very near us physically, which means if something touches us, we will know we have been touched. If there is something which is right in front of our eyes, we know that we are seeing something. But he says, even if these are very near, sannikarshena yadyapi, na bhavet yoga bhangaya, there will be no obstruction to the union with the self. And this union, Bhagavan has then gone on to explain to us, is of two kinds. One is the Sahaja Samadhi, where objects are seen, but one is ever in union with the self. Or it could be the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, about which we meditated last time. And we also found that the doorway to Sahaja Samadhi is through Nirvikalpa Samadhi. The crossing of the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, consciously getting into Nirvikalpa, consciously getting into a state of no thoughts, not as a laya, not as a dream, not as if in sleep, but consciously getting to freedom from thoughts, even if that conscious experience is brief. Getting that experience makes us free from the dependence not only on thoughts, but it makes us free from the dependence on or the worry about blank. The worry about not knowing. When one gets into Nirvikalpa, when one gets into the self, free from thoughts, through Anubhava, we will know that thoughts are not necessary for our existence. And we will also know that the absence of thoughts is not something to be feared, because it does not take away from our existence even to the slightest degree. In our present condition, we believe that we are alive, alert, awake, useful only if we have thoughts. Everything can be done only through thought. That is our present belief. We are therefore completely depending on thoughts. We hold on to our thoughts because of an underlying fear that without thoughts, we will either cease to exist altogether or we will become completely useless. But when we experience the state of the thought-free Nirvikalpa Samadhi, in which there is no upadhi, Vishaya asannidhau bhavet, there is no presence of any object whatsoever, which means there is no presence of any thought whatsoever. When one reaches this point through the question, who am I? When the thoughts have been cut off and the I thought has been isolated and the question, who am I, is asked, then all thoughts and the thinker will cease. So there is no Vishaya, because the first Vishaya, the first object is the thinker, the I thought. That is the first object. And then other objects, the other thoughts. So both these objects have to be merged or have to disappear or dissolve into the self through the inquiry. This is the path which Bhagavan is giving us through the definition of the Nirvikalpa and the Sahaja Samadhi in this chapter on the sides of the heart. The necessity to get back to the source, not only through the question, for whom are these thoughts, but further with the question, who am I, allowing the I thought also to dissolve in its source and abide there. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ratna.
Thank you, Akam. Aparasachit Sukavarirashe Yasyornimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chintavihinam Hrudi Chintayami Chintavihinam Hrudi Chintayami. Namo Ramana. Thank you all.
Namo Ramana Dileep. Thank you. Namo